Hello, I'm Kent Zimmerman from the Department of Communication at Sinclair Community College. The departmental faculty has what we call core content. These are the concepts that we believe that the students in the interpersonal communication course should be able to not only understand but apply in their lives. We looked at the material in the current text and found several issues that perhaps could use further clarification. One of those concepts we decided to elaborate upon is in the area of conflict. Specifically, we're going to take a look at the 4 different types of conflict that might be helpful not only for your understanding but also for your edification. Let's take a look at what conflict is before we talk about the 4 types. The textbook definition describes conflict as an expressed struggle between interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals with scarce resources and experience interference from the other party in achieving those goals. That's a really good definition, but what does it mean? Let's try to break it down. An expressed struggle means that you have an issue about something, and that issue really bothers you. That issue isn't something that you can handle on your own because it involves somebody else, and you can't get away from that other person, so therefore you're hooked, you're connected, you're interdependent with that person, and that person can't get away from you. The focus is on some goal, something that you want, need, or like, and there just isn't enough of that to go around. Life would be great if that person weren't there, because then you'd not only get your way, but you'd have access to that stuff. So if that person would somehow disappear, life would be great. So conflict is inevitable because we don't always get what we want, what we like, or what we need. We have to learn how to interact and relate with other people who have different priorities in life and have different goals in their experience as well. So what we're going to do is try to explain how this definition of conflict has application for you and your life, and specifically how you might be able to identify what the core issue is perhaps more quickly and respond more appropriately. Wilmot, who is an expert in interpersonal conflict, describes the issue like this, that perception is at the core of all conflict analysis. What you think you saw, what you think you heard, what you thought you meant to say, what you thought you really wanted to have happen is going to be very different from what the other person involved in the encounter may be thinking. They heard something different from you. They saw something different from you. They interpreted something very differently from you. And as a result of that, we have a clash of views that can't easily be explained. A good way then to try to make sense out of these issues that we have with other people would be to take the 4 different kinds of conflict that you and I experience and try to make sense out of them so that we'll be able not only to better understand what's going on, but what are some of our options then when we engage in those encounters. There are 4 types of conflict, and if you think of these on a scale, they get progressively more difficult to handle. The most easy of the 4 to manage would be pseudo-conflict. Second would be content conflict. Third would be value conflict, and the most challenging of the 4 would be ego conflict. Let's take them one by one. What is pseudo-conflict? Rudolf Vertebur, in his book Interact, describes pseudo-conflict as a conflict that is apparent but is not real. It is a conflict that you might even have interpersonally or intrapersonally. It's an occasion where you might believe that 2 situations cannot simultaneously be managed, and as a result, you work yourself into a frenzy. The key here, though, is pseudo is Latin for fake. It's a false conflict. Whereas we think 2 things can't be achieved, they actually can. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you are a fan of the World Cup soccer tournament, and today is the finale between two outstanding teams. You've built your whole weekend around watching this finale. But lo and behold, you remember that you promised your fiance a walk in the park. It's 70, it's sunny, it's a beautiful day, and she's looking forward to that walk. The problem is, the soccer finale is intended to start about the same time that you promised her to take that walk. Now, on the surface, it looks like two goals cannot simultaneously be achieved. How do you take the walk in the park and watch the World Cup soccer both at 2 o'clock? Can't be done, right? Well, it's a pseudo or false conflict because there are options available to us. We take the walk earlier in the day or later in the day, or you TiVo that World Cup soccer finale and watch it without commercial interruption later in the day. And voila, you get to do what you wanted to do, watch that soccer game, and your fiance is just pleased as punch that you took that walk on that beautiful day that she was really looking forward to. The second kind of conflict is what Vertebra calls a content conflict, and that's where the information that is presented by you would be disputed by the other person. This is where you thought you remembered something to be accurate, but the other person disagreed. It might be a definition of a word, might be an interpretation of an event, might be the details of some occasion that you actually experienced. That other person has a memory that has lots of different details. I'm a fan of the Chicago Cubs. I know their history pretty well. Let's say that someone told me that the Chicago Cubs won their last World Series ring in 1945. Well, I would say close, but no cigar. No, not quite. The Cubs played the Detroit Tigers in 1945, but they lost the series. Actually, the Cubs last won the World Series in 1908. So it's been 100 years since the Cubs have actually won a World Series ring. Maybe you have disagreements with family and friends about who starred in a movie. You know your movies. How do you handle something like that? Well, it's a content conflict where we could Google the information, we could go rent the movie, pop it in the machine, hit the play button, and then when the credits show, there's the answer, and the content is resolved because the information has been found. Life gets a little more difficult than when we engage in a value conflict. Value conflicts occur when beliefs focus on maybe what is good or bad, and those beliefs are not compatible with the other individual. You have been raised with a certain value system. I have too. Those value systems make us who we are. When the other person's value system contradicts what you think is right, important, or honest, that's when the issue becomes more complicated. You have a stance in your mind, what you think should be appropriate. The other person is equally convinced that their stance has the moral integrity behind it as well. These are going to be more difficult conflicts to manage because now we're looking at what really drives you as an individual. What makes you you, and the other person the unique individual that he or she may be. For example, let's say that some U.S. senators believe that taxes should be raised to generate money to fund a jobs program. Certainly a very interesting proposal. Other senators, however, believe that tax credits should be given to business owners to hire these new employees. You notice both senators want to get people to work, but they have very different programs on how the funding should be sought to accomplish this particular goal. One senator wants to tax people. Another senator wants to give credit to business owners. So the money will be coming from very different places. And when you start talking about money, that's certainly a belief that rings true in the heart of many people. And they're going to probably be less responsive to an easy solution. Then life gets really complicated when we get to an ego conflict. By definition, Vertebrer says that an ego conflict occurs when winning the argument is paramount. You've got to come out on top. There's a winner and a loser, and you have no intention of losing. Typically, an ego conflict is triggered by one of several things. It could be an attack upon your intelligence. It could be an attack upon your worth as an individual, or it could be an attack upon one's heritage. Let's say you're in a classroom and a student asks a question, "Why aren't oranges red?" The teacher pauses a second and then says something like, "You don't have to worry about attending college, do you?" Well, certainly a comment like that would attack perhaps the intelligence, the worth, or the heritage of an individual. That is going to probably spark then a response from the student that will be inflammatory. If you are challenged, you're going to probably challenge back. You've heard the phrase fighting fire with fire. Typically that's what occurs in an ego conflict because we feel like that person has assaulted us, and now what I have to do is defend my honor and attack that person back. Let me take an example of you and a sales clerk through not only the definition, but through the 4 different types of conflict so that you could actually see how these concepts might come to fruition. Let's say, for instance, that you see a sale in the paper. And in the paper, it talks about how this particular sale is going to be available from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. And you think to yourself, wow, I think I really want to attend that sale because it's the best sale of the season. So in your mind, then, you think about your schedule, and your schedule is a little complicated, so you have a pseudo-conflict going on. You're supposed to go to class, you are supposed to go to work, and you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to accomplish those particular tasks, but also hit the sale during those sale hours? You make some adjustments, and no longer is the scheduling conflict a problem. The pseudo-conflict has disappeared. You get to the store and you see a stack of sweaters. It says sale price today only, 50% off. You look through the various sweaters and you find one that you like. You take the sweater to the counter and you put the sweater on the counter and you ask the clerk if she would check you out so that you could be on your way. The clerk takes the sweater, does the electronic swipe, and finds that that particular sweater is 25% off, not your expected 50% off. So now we have a content conflict. You're thinking that the information on the table said that the sweater was half off, but the computer scan has now shown that it is 25% off. We have a disagreement over information. It's a value conflict because you want to save money as much as you can. You don't want to give the store anything extra that they don't deserve. It's a value conflict for the clerk because she's been told a certain procedure to follow, and if she doesn't follow the procedure, she could lose her job. Her job is important to her, so she doesn't want to just ignore the rules for fear that there'll be some kind of retribution against her. You become frustrated at the fact that she's not listening to you and she's not selling you that sweater at 50% off. So unfortunately, you let loose with a couple of comments that are ill-timed. You talk about how you have always had problems with clerks in this store and that they ought to fire the technician who wrote the program that scans the sweaters because obviously he's incompetent. This should have been a half-off sale, not a 25% off sale. Your voice gets a little loud, and next thing you know, the store security is over there asking the departmental clerk, "Is there a problem here, sir?" Well, it was an express struggle because we had a sweater on sale and a disagreement over the percentage of decrease. We had interdependent parties because you have to buy that sweater and get a receipt before you walk out the door, otherwise you'll be charged with theft. The clerk has to finish working with your sale before she can turn and work on the next customer because the computer is focused on your particular sale. Incompatible goals because you have the priority of saving as much money as you can as quickly as you can. The clerk has a procedure to follow and doesn't want to deviate from that task. It's a scarce resource because it's the only sweater there that you like with that name brand, and all the other sweaters are store models that you probably would prefer not to wear. And finally, it's interference because if it weren't for that clerk, and if it weren't for the person who entered the code on the scan, you'd be out your door and you'd be on your way, but now you have to talk to store security because of the ruckus that you raised. So in essence, conflict is inevitable. It's not a case of if we're going to have conflict with someone, but a case of when and where, and how are we going to handle the conflict when it does emerge. Today, we tried to explain for you the 4 different kinds of conflict that you might experience. We talked about pseudo-conflict, content conflict, value conflict, and ego conflict. So whether it's a case of a conflict with a family member, friend, neighbor, coworker, or even that departmental clerk, now we hope you have a better understanding of the dynamics that go into having a conflict and some of the options that you have available in handling those conflicts. Thanks for listening.